Welcome to the Idea to Value podcast, where in every episode we highlight the latest insights into creativity and innovation from experts around the world. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn. I care about the evidence behind what makes ideas happen, and I've already helped thousands of people just like you through my unique insights into recent scientific findings of how creativity works. I also show you how to turbocharge innovation programs so they finally deliver on the value and ideas you've been struggling to execute. Get your free training on how creativity can be improved by registering now at www.ideatovalue.com. Now let's get on with today's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Idea to Value podcast. I'm thrilled to have Jeff Goins with me today. Jeff is a best-selling author, and for all our creative people on the podcast, author of Real Artists Don't Starve, a very provocative title, especially in today's environment. Jeff, it's wonderful having you here.
Thanks for having me, Nick. Good to be here.
So for people who aren't aware of you or your work, could you give us a bit of a background as to how you got started in your journey around creativity?
Sure. So I've always made things. When I was a kid, I drew cartoons of Garfield. When I was a little bit older, my dad taught me how to play guitar. And so I started a band in high school called Decaf. We had two electric guitars and an electric bass, no drummer. We thought, if there was such a thing as decaffeinated music, it would probably be percussionless. And so, it was a lot of sound, a lot of noise. And then, I went to college, and writing was always this thing that I kept returning to. Elizabeth Gilbert says, writing is my home, not in the sense that it's where I come from, but it's the place that I always go back to. And so writing was this thing that I kept returning to. I studied Spanish in college. I studied abroad. I went to Spain for a little while. And then I graduated and traveled the country with a band, with a music group for a year. And this was like a dream come true. This is what I thought I wanted to do. And my favorite part, we would play 5 to 10 shows a week for, 9 months straight. And I got very good at guitar, very good at driving 12 hours a day and eating gas station food. But my favorite part of the week was for an hour or so, I would sit down, usually in somebody's home or something, borrowing their computer. And I would write a blog post detailing everything that we had done that week. So here I am playing professional music, living the dream, not making any money. And my favorite part of playing professional music was sitting down writing a blog post. And I moved to Nashville, and I eventually got a job as a marketing director for a nonprofit. I was hired as a writer, and then got into marketing, and I thought marketing was evil, and I began to reorient my understanding around marketing through the teaching of people like Seth Godin, and I began to understand that marketing is helping ideas spread. And so what I was doing was I was helping people's stories spread. So as a marketing director of this nonprofit, we are an international relief and development organization doing service projects all over the world. So my job was basically to recruit people for these trips, for these projects, and to raise money for them. And so I was using a lot of storytelling to do that. And I did this for 6-7 years, and I began to feel this itch, which was that I have a story. I have ideas that I want to spread. And so I've been doing this for other people. Could I do this for myself, right? So I started a blog, and I started sharing my ideas, and I didn't even know what I was trying to do, except that I felt like I needed to say something, and I wasn't quite sure what it was, but I knew how to market my ideas, and I began to promote them through social media and blogging, and just experimenting with that. Pretty quickly grew a large audience, and teaching what I was doing as a writer. So I was writing, I got a book contract. And so then I would teach my audience, here's what I just did. And so in real time, I was becoming a full-time writer and showing people how to do it. And so I started teaching online courses and publishing books and sharing. On one hand, I was writing personal development, self-help books about ideas that I was curious about. And then on the other hand, I was teaching online courses about the thing that I had just done. And so within about 2 years of starting that blog, I quintupled my income. I was making not very much money working for a nonprofit, but I replaced my income, my wife's income. We both quit our jobs. We had a kid that year. I published 2 books. It was a crazy year. This was 2012. And I've been doing it ever since. The short version is I write books and teach other writers and creative entrepreneurs how to succeed.
I mean, it's such a beautiful story that
Mm.
You've finally ended up finding something that gave you creative fulfillment,
Yeah.
having gone through a couple of different creative outlets first. And I think it's
Yes.
really interesting that you called your book Real Artists Don't Starve, because it sounds
Mhm.
like when you're eating the cheapest food you can find at a gas station, that's
Yeah.
exactly what you were doing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This was a myth. I call this the myth of the starving artist. It was a myth that I believed for a long time. People misunderstand the term myth. Um, a myth is not something that's necessarily untrue. Myths are stories tell ourselves to make sense of our reality, right? So there are political myths. There are the myth of George Washington chopping down a cherry tree. Like that's a story that probably didn't happen, right? That is very a very important part of the American story, right? There are religious myths, and there are creative myths. Myths are stories that may or may not actually be objectively true, factually true, but myths are stories that become true when we believe them, right? When we base an entire cultural identity around a story, it becomes true. And so the story of the starving artist, I argue, becomes true if you believe it, right? And so when I was touring with a band, I was a starving, broke artist, and I thought that was the best I could hope for, right? And so we would tour the country, and we would often stay in host homes to save money. So we would stay in people's houses after playing a show, and they would bake us a casserole or something. And many people, often upper middle class, middle aged people, would tell us, "It's so great that you're doing this now, because when you get older, you're gonna have to get a real job." And I agreed with them, right? I was like, "Oh yeah, of course. I'm just doing this for a year or two, and then I'll, go get a real job." And that's exactly what I did. And it wasn't until years later when I found myself as a full-time writer, realizing, oh, like the story that you tell yourself about your life and your work becomes true, right?
And
And
even the
yeah,
moment you described it just now, when you got your real job in marketing, at that
that's
point you
right.
thought, "Oh, this is evil. This isn't
Right.
me
I was selling
fulfilling my
out.
credit." Yeah, you're a suit.
Yeah, that's right.
You've gone corporate.
But
Um,
that I thought that was the best available to me, so I went along with it.
but why do you think there is this myth? What has perpetuated this idea that if you want to really express yourself creatively, that there needs to be this element of suffering about it?
Um, well, some stories, we just get caught in this loop where we keep telling the story over and over again. In the book, I historically break down where that happens. And it happens in the Romantic era, and we're still kind of living in the aftermath of that. But artists did not always starve and suffer for their work, right? And so the Renaissance was a particularly bright period in history for creative individuals, especially sort of the typical artist, painter, sculptor, whatever. And Michelangelo really changed that. He broke the glass ceiling. During his time, artists were kind of, middle class merchants. And he grew up. He had a last at the time. Not many people had last names. So if you had a surname, it was understood that you came from nobility, right? You had some noble blood in you. But his family was very poor. And so the story that they told was, we're a noble family that's lost all of our money, lost our fortune, fallen out of favor with the other noble families, and we've got to like ascend the social ladder again. And so when Michelangelo decides to be an artist, in the same way that kid graduating high school or college says, "I want to go be an artist," the parents would sort of cringe. You need a backup plan. That was true in his time at that time. But he understood, my family is noble. I've got to reestablish the Buonarroti family as this noble family. And so when he becomes an artist, he decides very early on, I'm going to be an aristocratic artist. I'm going to be a rich artist. And this had never really been done before. And he does exactly that. He works for popes and princes. He charges 10 times what everybody else does. He doesn't keep a shop like a lot of his peers do. And he just sets himself apart in a very unique way. And he becomes the wealthiest artist of the Renaissance. And at the time of his death, he has something like $50 million to his name. And at that point, he's now the richest artist who's ever lived. Now, what's interesting about that is he's not an anomaly. Many people after Michelangelo follow in his footsteps. He makes this thing that was never before possible, and it continues for many, many years until, kind of the Romantic period in the, mid to late 1800s. And we've been kind of living with that story ever since. So the short answer is, one, it wasn't always this way. So why is it this way now? Because it's the story that we've been telling and living into. But it's just not true. And I argue that in the book, even, since the Romantic period, there are plenty of artists who have made a great living. But there are a lot of people who are profiting off of the illusion of I'm a poor, struggling, broke artist. Picasso said, I would like to live as a pauper, but with plenty of money. And so many artists did that. Picasso died with a net worth of $500 million. He was not a pauper. So it's a story that we like to believe because we tend to attach a certain amount of purity. Like, you're not doing it for the money, right? And it's an idea that has been perpetuated, and we've told it over and over and over again. And I think we think, if you're not doing it for the money, it's somehow more pure. But the truth is, you go back to the Renaissance, and those guys were doing it for the money. They couldn't otherwise do it.
There's probably a big degree of confirmation bias as well, that a lot of people, if they're asked to name struggling artists or people who had a really difficult upbringing or childhood, they can name 10, 20 of those examples. But that's ignoring the fact that many people who end up being successful innovators and creatives didn't necessarily have to struggle.
Yeah, it's just not true. It'd be like saying, a starving doctor, right? Or a starving lawyer. Now, what's funny about these professions is we understand, doctors and lawyers to be high income earners. But I have plenty of friends who are doctors and lawyers who are broke because they're making $500,000 a year, spending $475,000 or $550,000, right? They're in debt. So they don't have a high net worth. They're not actually wealthy. They're just got lots of cash flow going. And, something is similar in the arts. There's been plenty of very interesting studies that demonstrate people who get a job in the arts do just as well as somebody in kind of a traditional STEM job, your typical safe bets for parents. And there is this movement, there is this resurgence of creative professionals, more like creative entrepreneur types, who are writers, painters, musicians, makers, all kinds of artists who are making a name for themselves. They're building an audience, and they're creating their art just for their audience and making a living off of this. I call this the new Renaissance. This is a movement of thriving artists. And I'm not talking about Taylor Swift, right? I'm talking about, the guy down the street who writes. I live in Nashville, a big songwriting mecca, writes songs for all of these big artists and makes $200,000 a year. He's not famous. Nobody knows his name. He's doing what he loves. He's making a good living. He's thriving. He's happy. He's thriving in every sense of the word. There are more and more people like this that are popping out because it's easy to do this. But in order for that to happen, you really have to change your mindset. And I know two groups of people living in Nashville: starving artists and thriving artists. I talk to the starving artists. I go, "How's it going?" "Oh, it's really hard." And they make $20,000 a year touring, 100 to 200 days a year with a band. And they're living into the story that they're telling themselves in the same way that I lived in the story that I was telling myself. And then you talk to these thriving artists, they're no more talented or less talented, but they talk about their art as a business. They understand that this is a job, and they're still very creative, but they get the game. They understand that there's more to it than just making things and hoping people show up. And so they're telling themselves very different stories about their work. And so I think if you're going to thrive in your creative work, you have to start with the story that you're telling yourself and go, where did that come from? And is this even true? And is it possible that I could tell myself another story and live into that? Going back to Michelangelo, he grew up with this story that I came from noble birth and I have to become a very wealthy artist, right? So hundreds of years later, researchers, historians did a bunch of research, genealogical research and whatnot, and found out they could find no noble blood. They could find no noble lineage to the Buonarroti family. So here you have this young artist who hears this story. We used to be rich, essentially. So if I'm going to be an artist, which is not typically a wealthy profession, I'm going to have to be a rich artist. And he becomes, at the time, the richest artist who had ever lived. And the story that he was telling himself wasn't true, but because he believed it, it became true.
So how do we get to this stage where people can change the stories that they tell themselves? What sort of stories do you think are holding people back? And what sort of stories, either from your own experience or from what you've seen work with other people, really managed to switch someone from a starving artist to a thriving artist?
You mentioned confirmation bias. So really, it's an experiment. Is it possible that it could be true that I don't have to starve as an artist? Because people, they get all caught up in statistics and stuff. But statistics actually don't affect individuals. People don't understand this. Statistics don't affect individuals. Statistics can only apply to groups, right? So you are not statistically anything, right? It's not statistically probable that you're going to do this or that because you're an individual. So you're actually, a study group of one, right? And so there's no statistical anomalies or outliers. It's just you, right? And so all that matters is what you want and where you're going to go. And yeah, obviously there's all kinds of circumstances, but people get all caught up in statistics. Well, only this amount of people make a living at this. That actually doesn't matter to you. The question is, do I think it's possible for me to make a living as a creative professional doing the work that I love? Could it be possible? And you start with that possibility, and then you start to look for examples. I mean, this is how human brains work. Look for the confirmation bias. You're going to do this anyway. So experiment with believing that something else could be possible and then find confirmation of that. That's exactly what I did with Real Artists Don't Starve. I had started to see that people were making a living doing this. And so I thought maybe this is just a choice, not a necessary condition of doing creative work. And then I started to find lots of stories throughout history of very creative geniuses making a great living, making smart business choices about their work and thriving as a result of it. And so the argument
I don't want to be controversial, Jeff, but it sounds very much like you're telling people to follow their passion and all their dreams are going to come true. And I've seen many scientific studies showing that usually ends in disappointment for the majority of people.
Right. Yep. Yeah. No, I would never say that. No. I would never say just follow your passion. What I would say is, and I like Lewis Schiff's take on this in a book called Business Brilliant, where, speaking of studies, he surveyed 400 American households that were middle class, and then 400 American households that were self-made millionaires and billionaires. And he asked them the same questions, and their answers were very different. And essentially what he found was the middle class is telling themselves a story that keeps them in the middle class. For example, they said, what does it take to succeed? And they said, well, you just have to follow your passion, right? And the money will follow. Do what you love and the money will follow. And then you ask the self-made millionaires and billionaires who had come from the middle class. They're self-made, right? And they said, no. Don't start with your passion. Follow the money, right? This is what every good entrepreneur knows. Look for the opportunity, follow the money, but do what you love. And so I think, you've got two sort of extremes of this. Just take the secure job, do the thing that's going to pay the bills, and then, your art or whatever can be a hobby. Well, that ends in a lot of disappointment and regret for a lot of people. They get to the end of their lives and they go, I never did the thing that I wanted to do. I just took the secure, safe route. I have no problem with people, going and working for a law firm or an accounting firm or whatever, if that's what you want to do, right? But then the other extreme is, I'm going to do what I love and I'm probably going to starve and suffer for it and never make a good living. And I think the smartest thing to do, and this is a shift for a lot of artists, is you have to kind of put on your entrepreneur hat. Every good entrepreneur I know looks first for opportunity, right? And I think of it as passion, skill, demand. That's how you have a fulfilling career. The intersection of what do I love, what do people want from me, and what am I good at? And if you find the intersection of those three areas, you're going to be okay. And so most people start with, what do I love? Well, there's plenty of things that I love that people aren't interested in paying me for. So I don't start there. I don't start with skill because I can learn new skills. I start with demand. What do people want right now that I can get excited about, that I can get passionate about and even get good at? and bring that to the table. And it turns out there are lots of things that I'm good at that people want, that I can get passionate about, that I wouldn't, if you were to ask me what my passion is, it wouldn't be the first thing that I would say. And so I think you've got to get good at cultivating a portfolio of skills and interests, and then pay attention to what the market wants, and then go, how can I meet that need in a way that I find personally fulfilling? Because if you don't do that, there's not going to be any longevity. Passion, skill, you've got to be good at it so that you enjoy it. And we tend to enjoy things that we're good at. So these things kind of work together. People have to want it from you. And if you enjoy it, you're going to be able to do it for a long time.
I think what a lot of people don't realize is you can actually cultivate passion. And a lot of people, especially when they're younger, in their teenage years, or especially in college before they go out into the job market, they think that what they feel at that point in time has to determine what they're going to really enjoy doing for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I agree. I'm more interested in flow these days than passion, because passion can quickly devolve into, this is what I feel like doing. And the truth is, if you only do what you feel like doing when you feel like doing it, that's actually not interesting. It gets boring very quickly, and you don't get better. You don't grow as a human being, and it can be a very depressing place to be. There's plenty of days where I go, I don't want to get out of bed, or I'm tired, or I don't want to do this thing. And then afterwards, I'm like, this is amazing. I'm so glad I did this. So I like the idea of flow, which Mihai is really the intersection of competency and challenge, right? So what am I good at? And is it difficult enough to keep me interesting? And if it's too difficult, if I'm not competent at it, it's going to cause anxiety. If it's too easy, it's going to cause boredom. But as you said, often passion comes as a result of having a problem to solve and having enough of the necessary skills to bring to the table and solve that problem. And so I think it's very healthy to remain curious about what you could be passionate about. But you can't start with passion. You have to start with demand.
Jeff, I realize that we're coming up to the end of the interview soon, but I've been following you and your work for quite a while now. I like how prolific you are in generating your writing,
Thank you.
and your insights on creativity. But what keeps you creative? What's helped you sort of continue to develop as your own artist?
I remember hearing an interview where Adam Grant asked Malcolm Gladwell what his purpose was, what his mission was. And Gladwell basically said, I'm trying not to get bored, right? And Adam Grant was sort of incredulous about this. And he's like, why? You're writing these books that are changing the cultural consciousness. And he's like, yeah, I'm just having fun, trying not to get bored. I think what keeps me creative and creating is staying on the edge of doing work that I personally find interesting, right? And it's easy once you've kind of made a name for yourself, or made a little ripple in a certain community, to just kind of keep pandering to the influence and audience that you have. And I very quickly get bored doing that. And so the challenge for me is, the career challenge is I have to do stuff in such a way that hopefully I can keep getting paid to do it. So I'm paying attention to the demand. But if I just do that, I find that boring, and my audience finds it boring. And so I think what keeps me creating is doing stuff that forces me to grow, right? So the most recent creative outlet is I started writing poetry. It was something I haven't done since I was a teenager. And I started writing it again, and it's unlocking all kinds of other things in my life and work that I didn't know was there. And so I think for me, I have to never assume that I know what the edge is, right? This is what I do, and I only do this. And, a great artist keeps reinventing themselves. They keep recreating their own identity. They understand that their self, their person, who they think they are, is a great work of art, right? And they can't ever settle for, who they were yesterday. Picasso, I heard a biographer say about Hemingway, the greatest character he ever created was himself. There's something true about that when you look at who you are as your body of work, and you keep creating and recreating yourself and reimagining who you are in a new season, in a new point of your life. And so for me, that's the exciting part, is I'm never actually arriving. I'm always kind of on this journey of finding out who I am, and then the work that's going to come out from that.
Jeff, it's been wonderful speaking with you today. I'm sure people want to find out more about you and your work. What's the best place that they can go to find out more?
It was my pleasure, Nick. Thanks for having me. Go to my blog, goinswriter.com, Goins writer.com, like coins, but with a G, and sign up for the newsletter. I write a weekly newsletter that has a blog post and audio essay. And so I just write kind of an essay on creative work every week, send it out via newsletter, and you can listen to that on my podcast or read it as an essay.
And I can attest to the quality of the newsletter. I read it myself. Jeff, it's been wonderful having you here, and I look forward to speaking again with you soon.
Likewise. Thanks, Nick. My pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked it, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave me a comment about what you thought and what you'd like to see more about. If you want to take your creativity and innovation capabilities to the next level, then invest in yourself with the premium training only available at ideatovalue.com. These exclusive training modules have all been put together by me, Nick Skillicorn, and have been used by thousands of artists, innovation leaders, and CEOs to become better at understanding the source of their creativity and executing on their innovation ambitions. And there is no risk to you, as they are backed by our money-back guarantee. Now, don't forget to go out there and make your ideas a reality. See you again soon.